Thomas Mercer had not seen his childhood friend, Elijah Parker, in nearly 15 years when he received the unexpected invitation to visit the old Parker farmhouse in Riverside. The letter had arrived during a particularly difficult period in Thomas's life, a failed marriage, a career at a standstill, and the prospect of escaping the city for a few days seemed like a welcome reprieve. He remembered the farmhouse fondly. The creaking wooden floors, the vast field stretching toward the horizon, and the magnificent mango tree behind the house where he and Elijah had spent countless summer afternoons building forts and telling ghost stories. The drive to Riverside took nearly 4 hours, most of it along winding country roads that seemed to narrow with each passing mile. Thomas noticed how the landscape gradually transformed from suburban sprawl to dense forests and scattered farmhouses. It was as if he were traveling backward in time, retreating from the modern world into a place where life moved at a gentler pace. He rolled down the windows, allowing the fresh country air to fill his lungs, a welcome change from the polluted city atmosphere. When Thomas finally pulled into the long gravel driveway of the Parker farm, he was struck by how little had changed. The 2-story farmhouse stood exactly as he remembered it, its white paint peeling slightly at the edges, the wraparound porch sagging just a bit in the middle. Behind the house, he could see the outline of the massive mango tree, its branches extending like arms reaching for the sky. The sight filled him with nostalgia, but also with an unexpected sense of unease that he could not quite explain. Elijah emerged from the front door before Thomas had even turned off the engine. He looked older than his 35 years, with premature gray streaking his dark hair and deep lines etched around his eyes. Yet his smile was warm and genuine as he embraced Thomas, clapping him firmly on the back. "It has been too long, my friend," Elijah said, helping Thomas with his bags. "The house has felt empty, without your laughter echoing through these old rooms." As they walked toward the house, Thomas noticed how Elijah's gaze repeatedly darted toward the mango tree in the backyard. Each time, a shadow seemed to pass over his face, a momentary darkening of his expression that vanished so quickly Thomas wondered if he had imagined it. Just before they entered the house, Elijah placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. "There is one rule during your stay," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Stay away from the old mango tree at night. It is not safe anymore." Thomas laughed, assuming it was a joke, but Elijah's expression remained deadly serious. "Promise me, Thomas." Confused but unwilling to argue, Thomas nodded his agreement. That evening, Elijah prepared a hearty meal of roasted chicken and vegetables from his garden, and the two friends sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in dramatic hues of orange and purple. They reminisced about their childhood adventures, laughing at memories of stolen pies, cooling on windowsills, and forbidden midnight swims in the creek. As darkness fell, Elijah built a fire in the old stone pit near the house, and they moved their conversation there, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. "Do you remember when we carved our initials into the trunk of that mango tree?" Thomas asked, gesturing toward the massive silhouette looming in the darkness behind the house. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Elijah tensed, his shoulders hunching forward as if warding off a sudden chill. He glanced nervously at the tree, then quickly looked away, poking at the fire with unnecessary force. "That tree has changed, Thomas," Elijah said after a long pause. "Everything around here has changed since my parents died. I should have sold this place years ago, but something always stopped me." He stared into the flames, his expression distant. 3 years ago, a boy from the village, Miguel Santos, climbed that tree. He was only 10 years old. The branch broke, and he fell, broke his neck instantly. Elijah's voice had dropped to a whisper. Since then, strange things have been happening, things I cannot explain. Thomas frowned, studying his friend's face in the firelight. He had never known Elijah to be superstitious. As children, Elijah had always been the rational one, the one who explained away bumps in the night and shadows in the corner. "What kind of strange things?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his tone light, but feeling a creeping sense of unease despite himself. Elijah looked up, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Objects move when no one is around. Footprints appear in the dirt under the tree when there has been no rain to soften the ground. And at night, he paused, glancing again toward the tree. At night, there is singing. A child's voice, humming a song that Miguel's mother said was his favorite. He ran a hand through his hair. The locals will not come near this place anymore. They say the boy's spirit is angry because he died before his time. My housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, comes only during daylight hours, and she burns sage in every room before she leaves. Thomas wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but the genuine fear in his friend's eyes stopped him. That night, Thomas lay awake in the guest bedroom, listening to the old house creak and settle around him. The conversation by the fire had left him unsettled, not because he believed in ghosts, he most certainly did not, but because he was worried about his friend's mental state. Perhaps living alone for so many years had taken a toll on Elijah's mind. Perhaps grief over his parents' deaths had manifested in these strange delusions. Whatever the case, Thomas found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with concern. Around midnight, he got up and went to window. The moon was nearly full, casting a silvery glow over the yard behind the house. The mango tree stood in stark relief against the night sky, its massive trunk and sprawling branches creating an imposing silhouette. As Thomas watched, he thought he saw movement, a small shadow darting from one side of the tree to the other. He blinked, and it was gone. Probably just an animal, he told himself. A raccoon or a possum foraging in the night. Before he had time to reconsider, Thomas was pulling on his jeans and a sweatshirt. He would go out and investigate the tree himself, prove to Elijah that there was nothing supernatural about it, just an ordinary mango tree that had been the unfortunate site of a tragic accident. He grabbed his flashlight from his bag and crept downstairs, careful to avoid the steps that he remembered always creaked. The house was silent, except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and Elijah's gentle snoring from a master bedroom. Outside, the night air was unexpectedly cold, raising goosebumps on Thomas's arms as he made his way across the yard toward a mango tree. The closer he got, the colder it seemed to become, as if he were walking into a patch of winter in the middle of summer. He noticed, too, that the usual nighttime chorus of crickets and frogs had fallen silent. The only sound was the soft crunch of grass under his feet and his own increasingly rapid breathing. When he reached the tree, Thomas shone his flashlight around the base, noticing immediately that the ground was oddly bare. No fallen leaves, no dropped fruit, not even weeds or grass. It was as if the earth itself had been swept clean by an invisible hand. He reached out to touch the trunk, running his fingers over the rough bark. It felt ice cold, much colder than seemed possible on a summer night. Suddenly, from somewhere above him, Thomas heard a soft sound, the gentle humming of a tune he did not recognize. He swung his flashlight upward, scanning the branches, but saw nothing. The humming continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Thomas spun around, heart pounding in his chest, but he was alone in the moonlit yard. The humming grew louder, and with it came a bone-deep cold that seemed to seep into his very marrow. Without conscious thought, Thomas turned and ran back toward the house, not stopping until he had slammed the door behind him. Elijah was waiting for him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with 2 mugs of steaming coffee. He did not seem surprised to see Thomas breathing hard, his face pale with fear. "You went to the tree, did you not?" Elijah asked quietly. Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Elijah pushed one of the mugs toward him. "Drink this. It will help with the cold. It always does afterward." As the warmth of the coffee spread through his body, Thomas found his voice. "I heard something," he admitted. "Humming, and it was so cold under that tree. Elijah, unnaturally cold." He shook his head, trying to make sense of what had happened. "But that does not mean it was a ghost. There must be a rational explanation." "I have been looking for a rational explanation for 3 years," Elijah replied, his voice weary. "I have had scientists from the university examine the tree for fungal infections that might cause hallucinations. I have had the soil tested for gases that might create cold spots or affect perception. I even hired a team to check if there might be some kind of underground water source that could explain the temperature changes." He sighed deeply. Nothing. They found nothing unusual at all. As morning light began to filter through the kitchen windows, Elijah told Thomas the full story of Miguel Santos. The boy had been the youngest son of a family that worked at the neighboring farm. He had been a bright, cheerful child who loved to sing and climb trees. On that fateful day, he had sneaked onto the Parker property while Elijah was in town running errands. By the time Elijah returned home, paramedics were already there, but it was too late. Miguel had been dead for hours, his small body crumpled at the base of the mango tree. His mother was inconsolable, Elijah said softly. She cursed this land, cursed the tree, cursed me for not cutting it down years ago when the first branch had shown signs of rot. She said her son's spirit would never rest, that he would remain bound to the place of his death until proper respect was paid. Elijah looked up, meeting Thomas's gaze. I did not believe her then. I do now. That afternoon, as they were preparing lunch, a knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Alvarez, Elijah's housekeeper, a small, wiry woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had brought fresh bread and vegetables from her garden, but her real purpose seemed to be to assess Thomas. She studied him intently as he helped her unpack the food, and then, apparently satisfied with what she saw, began to speak in rapid, accented English. After lunch, Elijah suggested they play football in the yard, just as they had done as children. "It will clear our heads," he said, retrieving an old ball from a closet. Thomas agreed eagerly, glad for the chance to engage in a normal activity after the strangeness of the previous night. They marked goals with sticks at either end of the yard, carefully positioned them far from the mango tree, which stood like a silent sentinel at the edge of their makeshift field. For a while, it was just like old times, the two friends laughing and shouting as they competed for the ball, their earlier tension momentarily forgotten. But then, during a particularly enthusiastic kick, the ball sailed to the air in a high arc and landed directly beneath the mango tree. Both men froze, their laughter dying abruptly. "I will get it," Thomas said, moving toward the tree before Elijah could protest. As Thomas approached, he felt none of the unnatural cold from the previous night. In the bright sunlight, the tree looked perfectly ordinary, massive and ancient, yes, but just a tree. He bent to retrieve the ball, and was about to turn back when something caught his eye. There, on the trunk of the tree, at about the height of a child's reach, was a handprint. It looked fresh, the outline clear against the rough bark, as if someone with muddy hands had recently pressed their palm against the tree. Thomas called Elijah over, pointing to the handprint. "Did you do this?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Elijah shook his head, his face draining of color. "That was not there this morning," he whispered. "I check every day." Thomas reached out to touch the mark, finding the mud still slightly damp. As his fingers made contact with the handprint, a child's laughter echoed to the yard, though there was no one else in sight. They left the ball where it lay and retreated to the house, both men shaken by the experience. Mrs. Alvarez, who was still there cleaning the kitchen, took one look at their faces and crossed herself. "You saw something," she stated, not a question. When Elijah explained about the handprint, she nodded grimly. "The boy is becoming stronger. He wants something from you, Senor Parker. From both of you now." That night, Thomas struggled to fall asleep again, his mind replaying the incident with the handprint over and over. Around midnight, he heard it again, the soft, haunting melody being hummed somewhere near the house. Getting out of bed, he went to the window and looked out. In the moonlight, he could see the football they had abandoned earlier was no longer beneath the tree. Instead, it was now sitting on the back porch, directly outside his bedroom window. But that was impossible. They had left it under the tree, and neither of them had gone back for it. The next day brought heavy, dark clouds that seemed to match the mood within the house. Elijah and Thomas moved through their morning routines in silence, each lost in thought about the strange occurrences of the past 2 days. By afternoon, the sky had darkened further, and the first distant rumbles of thunder could be heard approaching from the west. "There's a storm coming," Elijah observed, looking out the kitchen window toward the mango tree, which was now swaying slightly in the strengthening wind. Mrs. Alvarez arrived earlier than usual, her arms laden with candles and matches. "The power always goes out during storms," she explained, though both men suspected her real concern was something else entirely. As she moved through the house, placing candles in strategic locations, she muttered prayers under her breath. Before leaving, she pulled Thomas aside. "Tonight will be difficult," she warned him. "The boy's spirit is strongest during storms. It was raining the day he died. By evening, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning illuminated the yard in brief, stark flashes. During one such flash, Thomas thought he saw a small figure standing beneath the mango tree, but it was gone so quickly he could not be certain. He did not mention to Elijah, who was already on edge, jumping at every crash of thunder and glancing nervously toward the windows. At exactly 9 o'clock, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Elijah quickly lit the candles Mrs. Alvarez had left, their flickering light casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. The two men sat in the living room, pretending to read by candlelight, but actually listening intently to the sounds of the storm, and for anything else that might make itself heard in the darkness. They did not have long to wait. Around 10 o'clock, beneath the howl of the wind and the crash of thunder, they both heard it, the humming. This time, it was not distant or faint. It sounded as if it were coming from just outside the front door, clear and distinct, a cheerful children's tune that somehow managed to be more terrifying than any scream could have been. Thomas and Elijah stared at each other across the room, neither willing to move, both holding their breath as the humming continued. Then came the knocking, 3 sharp raps on the front door that made both men jump. "Do not answer it," Elijah whispered, his face ghostly pale in the candlelight. But Thomas was already moving toward the door, drawn by a curiosity stronger than his fear. Before Elijah could stop him, he had pulled it open. Standing on the porch, soaking wet and smiling, was a small boy of about 10. He had dark hair plastered to his head by the rain and wore muddy clothes that seemed oddly out of place. Not modern children's clothing, but the kind of simple garments that might have been worn decades ago. "Hello," the boy said, his voice eerily clear despite the raging storm behind him. "May I come in? I have been waiting for so long." Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak, unable to move. This had to be Miguel Santos. But how was it possible? The boy had died 3 years ago. Yet here he was, looking solid and real, rainwater pooling at his feet on the porch. Behind Thomas, Elijah had risen from his chair, his face a mask of terror. "No," Elijah whispered. "This is not possible." The boy, Miguel, tilted his head, his smile fading slightly. "You know it is me, Senor Parker," he said. "You have always known I was here." His gaze shifted to Thomas. "And you came to my tree last night. I showed you my handprint today. Now I need your help, both of you." Without waiting for permission, Miguel stepped past Thomas into the house, leaving muddy footprints on the wooden floor. In the flickering candlelight, Miguel told his story. He had indeed died falling from the mango tree 3 years ago, but his spirit had not moved on because of his mother's grief and anger. "She cursed this place," Miguel explained, his young voice oddly mature. "She said I would never know peace until proper respect was paid. But she did not understand what that meant, and neither did I until you came." He looked directly at Thomas. "You were the last person to carve your initials in my tree, along with Senor Parker, many years ago. You marked it as special. Now you must help make it sacred again." Miguel explained that in his family's tradition, when someone died in an accident, the place of death needed to be properly consecrated to allow the spirit to move on. Specific rituals had to be performed, offerings made, And most importantly, forgiveness had to be granted, both by the living to the dead and by the dead to the living. Senor Parker blames himself for my death, Miguel said solemnly. He thinks if he had cut down the rotting branch, I would still be alive. And I have been angry that my life ended so soon. We are both trapped by these feelings. The storm continued through the night, but by morning, the rain had reduced to a gentle drizzle. At first light, Elijah called Mrs. Alvarez, who arrived within the hour, accompanied by an elderly woman whom she introduced as Miguel's grandmother, Dona Carmen. The old woman took one look at the muddy footprints leading from the front door through the house and nodded grimly. He has shown himself, she said. Finally, we can help him find peace. Dona Carmen instructed Thomas and Elijah to prepare the area beneath the mango tree, while she and Mrs. Alvarez gathered the necessary items for the ritual. They cleared away debris and created a circle of stones around the base of the tree. Thomas noticed that the handprint he had seen the day before was now gone, the bark unmarked except for the old carved initials he and Elijah had made as children. By noon, everything was ready. Dona Carmen had brought candles, incense, flowers, and a small photograph of Miguel. She placed these items carefully around the circle, murmuring prayers in Spanish as she worked. Mrs. Alvarez had prepared special food, dishes that Miguel had loved in life, which she set out as offerings. Miguel's family arrived next. His parents, his siblings, all solemn-faced but determined to participate in freeing their son's spirit. As the ritual began, Thomas was surprised to find himself deeply moved by the proceedings. Dona Carmen led them in prayers asking for Miguel's peaceful transition to the afterlife. Miguel's mother, her face wet with tears, spoke directly to the tree, releasing her anger and her curse. I forgive this place, this tree, and I forgive you, Elijah Parker, she said, her voice breaking. It was an accident. My son was always climbing where he should not. His death was not your fault. Elijah stepped forward next, tears streaming down his face. I am sorry, Miguel, he said to the air around them. I should have maintained my property better. I should have been more careful. Please forgive me. As he spoke these words, the air around the tree seemed to shimmer, and Thomas caught a glimpse of Miguel standing among the branches, his form transparent but distinctly visible in the dappled sunlight. Then it was Thomas's turn. Dona Carmen had explained that as someone who had marked the tree and returned to it, he had become part of its story, part of Miguel's story. He needed to acknowledge the boy's presence and grant him permission to leave. Miguel, Thomas said, feeling slightly foolish but pushing through the discomfort. I see you. I acknowledge your spirit. You have made yourself known to us, and we have heard you. Now we release you from this place. You are free to move on. As the final words were spoken, a sudden breeze rustled to the branches of the mango tree, showering the gathered people with water droplets that sparkled like diamonds in the emerging sunlight. For a brief moment, Thomas thought he heard the humming again, that same cheerful tune, but this time it seemed to be fading, growing more distant with each note. Then it was gone, and with it went the strange heaviness that had hung over the property since Thomas's arrival. That evening, as Thomas packed his bags in preparation for his return to the city the next day, he and Elijah sat on the porch watching the sunset. Do you think it worked? Thomas asked. Is he really gone? Elijah nodded slowly, looking more at peace than he had since Thomas arrived. Yes, he said confidently. The tree feels different now. The whole place feels different. He smiled at his friend. Thank you for coming, Thomas. I do not think I could have faced this alone. As night fell, they both glanced toward a mango tree, but there was no humming, no mysterious cold spots, no unexplained movements. Just an ancient tree standing sentinel over the farmhouse, as it had for generations. Before going to bed, Thomas walked out to the tree one last time. The ground beneath it was now covered with fallen leaves and fruit, as it should be. Nature had reclaimed its normal patterns. Reaching out, he touched the spot where he had seen the handprint, finding the bark warm and rough beneath his fingers. Goodbye, Miguel, he whispered. Safe journey. In response, a single mango fell from the tree, landing softly at his feet. Thomas smiled, picked it up, and carried it back to the house, not as a sign or an omen, but simply as a fruit from a tree that was once again just a tree.